This is my submission for Unit 5 discussion, where we are discussing about data types and their applications in the real world. As a way of introduction, data type represents a format of data that our computer system or information system can process or can work with. The data type of a variable determines the type of operations that can happen with that type of data. Once a variable is assigned a data type, it can be used for computations in the program. Now, we have learned from this week's lecture that there are different types of data types, and the most common ones being the primitive, collections, and objects. Now, these are the main types of data types, but then they are also subdivided into subtypes. Now, I will explain starting with primitive, then collections, and then objects, and giving examples of each of those. Now, we've learned that primitive data types, these are data types that are predefined and supported by the programming languages. Their values can only contain a single value or a single thing. Examples of primitive data types are string, integer, a string or text, date time. I will explain the applications of the date time data type. The date time data type can be used, for example, in a flight booking application or in a hotel reservation where the person reserving space has to choose the date and time. It means the variables or the information system has to be able to handle the date and time data. The float is another example of a primitive data type. The float uses rational numbers that usually end with decimal places. A very good application for float would be in an application that is handling money. For example, when you're purchasing online, it means there are money values being saved or being used. So these monetary values will also have to be calculated, for example, to give you the total value, total cost of everything that you have purchased. So in that type of example, it means in an online ordering system where money has to be calculated, a float would be a very good example of data type to use. String or text data type is the type of data type that involves characters. And this is one of the most common data types in information systems or in programs. It is normally used to save anything that, or to display text, or to save anything that has to do with text or characters. A very good example would be an application where you are saving or you're storing customer records. So I'm saving customer records where there is the name of the customer, for example, where there is the address of a customer. Now you see there are a lot of applications where that actually applies, where you're keeping, say, names of students. Maybe it's a student system, student management system. So you're keeping names of students, the age of the students. Rather, the name of the student, not the age, but the names of the students, the addresses of the students, where they stay. So that would be a very good application of string or text and primitive. Now, apart from the primitive data types, there are what are called composite data types. Now, composite data types store and manage multiple pieces of related data under a single datum. Now, they are derived from primitive data types, but they offer increased functionality. Now, the examples are the ones that we know, like collections. These are examples of composite data types. Objects are examples of composite data types. Let me start with collections. Under collections, we know there are data types like lists. Lists is an ordered sequence of items. It is also one of the most used data types in Python, and it is very, very flexible. All the items in a list do not necessarily need to be of the same data type. They could be of different data types, but in the same list. A very good example where lists can be applied to is in a music player, where you've got songs and are in a list. And for the songs to be playing from one song to another, you'd use linked list. So when one song ends, it fades out and another one starts playing automatically. In that example, we could use linked lists. And then you also have got arrays. Arrays, that's also another example of collections. An array is used to collect or to store multiple values in a single variable. So instead of declaring multiple variables, you could declare one variable and it would keep multiple items in it. A very good example or application of arrays is when you're using a system that reserves space, say in a bus or in a plane. So you have to choose a seat number. So a seat number is a very good example of multi or two-dimensional array. And finally, I'll talk about objects. Now, object is a very special type of data type. Objects are normally used to store collections of data that are more complex than the others, as opposed to primitive, where there's only a single value being kept. Objects keep multiple values. For example, if you wanted to store information about students in a student's management system, so you would create an object called student. And then this object would have multiple properties, for example, date of birth, sex, etc. So instead of creating multiple variables, you'd create an object, and then this object will have these properties. So you'd create then multiple instances of this object that we can call student records, for example. So this is how some of the data types can be applied in real world.